In 1979, this song by the Knack was huge. My Sharona. It was number one in the States for 6 weeks. It was Capitol Records' fastest selling debut single since the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand. And the album it came from was also one of the most successful debuts in history, selling over 1 million copies in less than 2 months. After this though, the Knack faded away, quite dramatically. Why? Let's go through the full story of My Sharona and try to understand why the Knack were never quite able to replicate that success. And as always, if you love classic rock history like me, subscribe to the channel and join our pack. So, some quick context on how the band came about. In the mid-70s, frontman Doug Fieger moved to LA after his previous band, Sky, broke up. He was looking to form a new band. And he did just that by teaming up with lead guitarist Burton Avere. They then recruited drummer Bruce Gary and bassist Prescott Niles. The Knack was born. During this time in the mid to late 70s, Fieger and Avere were building a pretty respectable stockpile of demos and song ideas, several of which would appear on their first 2 albums. They spent a long time approaching labels with their demos, but no one seemed to be biting. No one was interested in their stuff. But at the same time, they were building a dedicated following from their live shows. They had a sound incredibly reminiscent of the British invasion from back in the 60s, emulating the feel and tone of bands like the Beatles, the Kinks, the Animals and the Rolling Stones. And people were digging that nostalgia. They had become the talk of LA's Sunset Strip, selling out shows at places like the Whiskey, the Starwood and the Troubadour. They had become so popular that the likes of Ray Manzarek from The Doors, Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen would jam with them on stage. And with this sort of attention, the labels couldn't say no to them for much longer. In fact, a bidding war then took place with multiple labels fighting for their signatures. Bruce got on stage with us on a Friday night, and by Monday morning we had 14 offers from labels. They would decide on Capitol Records, mainly because they handled the US operations for the Beatles, and the Beatles happened to be their favourite band. And the Beatles become a bit more important in this story later on, so remember that. They were paired with producer Mike Chapman, a man who certainly knew his stuff. He had worked with the likes of The Sweet, Suzi Quatro and Blondie, and he fully lent into the British invasion vibe when it came to recording the Knack's debut album. He basically set everything up as if it was still in the mid-60s. I was aware of them as everybody else in LA was, because there were lines of kids around the block to go see them at their shows. And of course, with the Knack being such a tight live band, the album was recorded with minimal fuss, over just 2 or 3 weeks, and with a budget of just $15,000. Unlike a lot of bands in the late 70s, they didn't use synthesizers or sampled drums. It wasn't overproduced, it was just a live band recording. Maybe this is part of the reason it cut through so effectively. It sounded timeless, right from the beginning. Get the Knack was released in June 1979, and the lead single from the album was My Sharona, a song written from personal experience. Now, before we get on to the inspiration behind the song, just a quick note to say that if you love my content, please do consider supporting me over on Patreon, or becoming a member of the channel. You'll get your name displayed in my videos, you'll get special badges in the comment section, and most importantly of all, you'll feed me a nice cold pint once a month. Links to all of that in the description below. Right, the story goes that Fieger's girlfriend at the time, Judy, introduced him to her friend. Her name was Sharona Alperin, a 17-year-old who worked in a clothing shop. The then 25-year-old Fieger would later describe it as love at first sight. He broke up with Judy and chased Sharona for a year. It was this chase that inspired the song. She'd also inspire other songs too, like Frustrated and She's So Selfish. It was a conscious effort for both me and Burton to come at it from the point of view of our remembered teenage selves. We wanted to tell the story from that place, where it's more raw and direct. Burton had been listening to Elvis Costello's This Year's Model album, and specifically the song Pump It Up. This would inspire both the drum beat and the famous guitar riff for My Sharona. Iger believed that writing songs about girls was what rock and roll was all about. And it's certainly the case for My Sharona, and it's also the case for the entire album. Every song seems like it was written by a sex-hungry teenager, despite him being in his mid-20s when he wrote it. I'd always thought of the Knack as an art project. The concept was to start out with our remembered adolescence on the first album. Then we'd progressively explore other, more mature things as we went on. While the album performed incredibly well, spending 5 weeks at the top of the US charts, critics weren't exactly fans of their sharp, sudden rise. A carbon copy band of nothing particularly original. Many were quick to point out similarities between them and the Beatles, especially when you compare the Get the Knack album cover with the Meet the Beatles cover. It's very similar, isn't it? While the band did deny merely copying bands like the Beatles, they also never tried to hide their British invasion influences. The song was also overplayed to death on the radio, which led to a lot of listeners simply getting sick of it, and the whole image of the song and the band was beginning to sour. When you suddenly become that famous, you tend to become subject to a ton of scrutiny. Their sudden explosion out of nowhere had skeptics accusing the band of being some sort of manufactured product, rather than a rock group. They were seen as arrogant, overhyped kids. San Francisco artist Hugh Brown even started a campaign called Nuke the Knack. They were so overhyped, I thought I'll do something that's kind of obnoxious and kind of funny. Plus, the band's subject matter of choice for the album didn't really sit well with people either. I mean, their songs were about chasing teenage girls, and the band quickly picked up a bit of a creepy, perhaps misogynistic vibe. Also, people saw the album as a watered-down version of punk, with its 60s influence. Why make an album that dilutes a movement that had just injected new life and energy into rock music? Their massive, rapid success had made them uncool, nearly as quickly. I mean, check out this quote from Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols. "I've literally played that album a million times, but I couldn't really tell people, because it was kind of uncool." Being from the Sex Pistols and that whole era, never had the public perception of a band shifted so quickly. They were the next big thing in one moment, and then suddenly a misogynistic sellout commercial rock band in the next. The Knack released their second album in early 1980 called But the Little Girls Understand, which is probably not a great title choice given all the backlash. But hey, it did go gold in the US, but it was far off the success of their first album, reaching 15 in the charts. It seemed people were now embracing the musical innovations of the 80s. And there was no room for an apparently manufactured band pretending to be from the 60s. They released 4 more studio albums after that, plus a 2012 compilation of early demos, but they were never able to recapture that success of the first album. None of them would even reach the top 50 in America. Around the same time, a similar story was happening with the Vapors and Turning Japanese. Remember that song? It was everywhere. Ever wondered why they didn't quite make it to the big time? Well, I've made a whole video on that too. You can click over there for that one next.